Hey everyone, geophysicist Stefan Burns here. Happy Sun Day. We've had quite a lot of energetic perturbations over the past few days. As many of you know, we've been looking for a source. The sun really hasn't been doing that much. We did get a 4.0 C-class flare late yesterday on the 28th. That was at 1950 Universal Time. It did launch a partial halo coronal mass ejection out into space. And so we may have an impact from that around June 2nd to the 3rd. But I think I found the source of these energetic perturbations. It's not the sun. In fact, it is a second nova explosion that has occurred. We had one back on June 12th. Well, there's been a second nova explosion now on the 25th, and it's still very, very bright, visible to the unaided eye. So we have these interstellar energy sources streaming into the solar system while the sun has been relatively quiet, but it has been responding in some unusual ways. We've been having these prominences, or these plasma tornadoes, as I like to call them, congregate here on the western limb. We'll give those an in-depth look. And we will also go into some of the other factors that are currently at play right now. We had a magnitude 6.6 earthquake yesterday in the Scotia Sea, south of South America, also a 6.1 in the Philippines. And today there's been a little bit of earthquake activity on the San Andreas Fault running up from Mexico through California. Nothing to concern yourself with, but directly on the fault. So we'll give that a look and much more in today's video. Here we have our sun in 131 angstroms, which allows us to see solar flares really nicely. Here we see a 4.0 C-class flare. That's from sunspot group 4126, a new sunspot group. And in fact, right now sunspots are back to 150. So we've been oscillating around this 100 to 150 zone as solar cycle 25 maximum has cooled off. And now we're seeing a pickup in flare activity, though we're not back to M-class range or X-class range. There are sunspots on the disk, and we most recently had this 4.0 C-class flare, the third highest categorization. Now, this did launch a partial halo coronal mass ejection out into space that appears that's going to hit the Earth. Let's check it out. Here we have our C3 coronagraph view, and we'll see two main things on this coronagraph view. This is 32 solar radii across. The sun is right there. It's denoted by that white circle. They put a disk over the sun in order to stop that visible light from reaching us, but so we can see the solar corona, because of course the sun is very, very bright. And so without that disk, you wouldn't be able to see the outflows of the solar wind. Well, for the past 24 hours up to that C-class flare, basically nothing had launched from the sun. And normally you see some stuff launch, maybe from the far side, some things launched from the Earth-facing side or from the limbs, these little kind of outbursts of coronal material. Well, there was effectively nothing until the C-class flare and the coronal mass ejection. You will see that launch out, okay, right going in this direction. And so it's very faint, but you will notice this push. See right there? That's that partial halo going in all directions, definitely more to the west solar coordinate system than to the east, but we do get that push come out like that and it sweeps around. And so NOAA has forecasted that's going to hit us early in June. We're not 100% sure if that will be a strong impact or whether it even will hit us in the first place, because you have to take some of this with a little bit of leeway. We're not, space weather is very difficult in general. But that does look like it's along the ecliptic plane because we see that signature to the north and the south. Now, the second thing that you'll see here is this very bright point of light. That's not the nova explosion. We'll talk about that later. That is Jupiter. So Jupiter right now is on the far side of the sun. And as a result, it's appearing very, very bright. It just performed what's known as a cazimi, where it goes in and conjuncts the sun. And so now it's moving away from that. And this is just in general a heightened energetic time, you could say, anytime you have a cazimi, especially a cazimi sequence where you get 1, 2, 3, 4 of them in a row, or perhaps even more. Those sort of things happen. We've been discussing that on the channel with the last video. The last big supernova impact on Earth, 1054 CE. There was a really crazy planetary cazimi sequence that occurred right before that in time. Well, this was a single cazimi. The next one coming up is Mars, so keep that in mind. Let's check out our NOAA space weather model for that coronal mass ejection. Here we have our latest NOAA space weather model for that 4.0 C-class flare and associated partial halo coronal mass ejection. We see it launch off here a little bit more to the west than that direct Earth-Sun line. Here we're looking top down on the ecliptic plane. So this is the top pole of the sun, same with the Earth there. And so we see it going off like this, but you will notice that there's this little bit right there that kind of hits that co-rotating interaction region of higher plasma density and then sweeps by us. You'll notice it's also aligned effectively in this plane right there. So this is south, this is north. So it is sweeping along the ecliptic plane. It's not shooting way to the north or to the south, which is important for impact. We see the plasma density go up here. It is a bigger spike there for stereo A, which is our stereo ahead satellite, but we do see this rolling increase in the plasma density according to their modeling. Keep in mind, that's not reflective of reality. We'll just have to wait and see, but this comes in right around midday or a little earlier, June 2nd universal time. You will see that there's a bit of velocity on this coronal mass ejection as well, but again, the bulk of that going a little bit to the west. It's going to hit stereo A pretty nicely according to this model, but we do see a slight enhancement right there. So that is what NOAA is showing for this coronal mass ejection. Not a strong one, but at least something. We did just have that high-speed stream impact, which sent the solar wind up to 700, even 800 kilometers per second at times. And what occurred after that was a flurry of earthquakes. Let's check it out. Here we have our USGS latest earthquakes map for all earthquakes magnitude 4.5 and greater for the past 7 days. We will switch that so we can see these earthquakes that popped off on the San Andreas Fault. But first, let's just look at all the earthquakes that have occurred since that magnitude 6.6 that happened in the Scotia Sea. Quite a lot of earthquakes since then. Some days you will check the 24-hour data and there won't be any earthquakes in that magnitude 5 range. Whereas here, if you look, we see a 5.2, 5.1, 5.1, 5.4, 5.3, 5.1, 5.1, 5.3, 5.1, and then finally our 6.6 in the Scotia Sea. That was at 8:32 a.m. Universal Time yesterday on the 28th. And then we also had a 6.1 here in the Philippines just a bit before that. And that was specifically at 23:07 Universal Time on the 27th. So about 9 hours in between. That follows up on another magnitude 6.1 earthquake that occurred just nearby. Actually a 6.2. We discussed that on the channel as it happened. So 2 magnitude 6 plus earthquakes in the Philippines, which is pretty interesting. We see a bit of activity here, like in Tonga and the Kermadec Trench. Most of these as being like magnitude 5s, 5.3, 5.5, a lot of 4s. But just in general, a bit of a heightened phase of activity, you could say, for that region. Just especially looking at the map, it stands out. Especially nearby, there's really not much happening. Let's go back to that one for the Scotia Sea because I did not show you on the map. But it is down here. And this is actually a very interesting place. I have been doing some research into the Scotia Plate. So there's that 6.6. And if we go up, we'll see the 6.2 that occurred in between Africa and South America on the mid-ocean ridge. And that was back on the 25th. But this 6.6 is the biggest earthquake that we've had over the past 7 days. Actually, for a while now, we've been kind of having this descending wedge on earthquake intensity. If you look at our data from Volcano Discovery, and now this 6.6 is the strongest. Who knows when we're going to get the next magnitude 7. But let me switch over to our 1-day 2.5 earthquakes, and let's check out what's happening in California and on the San Andreas Fault. This isn't anything to trouble yourself over, but often you don't see earthquakes directly on the San Andreas, and here we are. So being a California boy, I want to mention this. Here we see this magnitude 4.1. It's pretty big. Down there in the Gulf of California. And so that's the San Andreas is coming up right here. It starts to become strike slip rather than subduction or anything like that. And then if we go up a little further, right around Watsonville, we see 2 earthquakes here, a 2.9 and then a 3.1. So none of these are especially unusual, but we do see that San Andreas Fault running right up like this. And it's worth pointing out because if we look at our U.S. hazard map, we see that California has probably the highest seismic hazard for the continental 48. You also have the new Madrid zone there, which is a big seismic hazard, but it can have big earthquakes, but they're fairly infrequent in the geologic sense. But California is always shaking. And actually, let us look at the seismic waves propagating from that magnitude 6.6 because there's some interesting observations I'd like to point out. Here we have an animation showing these seismic waves propagating outwards across the globe from that magnitude 6.6 earthquake, and specifically we're looking at the North American seismic network, which is what most of these animations show because we have the data for that. So we start to see these waves coming through like this. Here is our vector direction coming up north from below South America, really close to Antarctica. And so we see these waves coming in, and then eventually we get these stronger surface waves. Look at how they propagate out across the East Coast and just the eastern seaboard, of course, all of the United States, and then eventually reaching up to Alaska. But what I want you to notice is that, of course, there's a lot of seismographs in California, but look how they're always flickering, right? There's always some activity in California. And so just from an energetic perspective, I find it interesting that there's always this low-grade seismic noise on the West Coast, whereas on the East Coast, typically it's quiet. And so as it relates to a high-magnitude earthquake and those waves going out, you're not going to feel that unless it's nearby. But perhaps our body's able to connect to that in some way and absorb that information. So you need a stronger signal to rise above the noise in California. There's already enough seismic activity that we do see it sweeping through now, California, and registering on the network, but you still see that noise constantly flickering on and off effectively. So if you live in these zones that are not that seismically active, you may have a better connection to some of these global seismic energies if you're just connected to that in some way, versus if you're living in an area that is seismically active, you're more likely to be connected energetically to what's happening in your local area. And something that is global and in fact affected the entire solar system simultaneously is the nova explosion of V572 Velorum. So we see the light curve here, we see that nova explosion there. Before that explosion occurred, is a very, very dim binary system, but what happened is, according to astronomers, there is a orbiting white dwarf around a larger star, and eventually that material accretes onto the white dwarf and then explodes outwards. So this is not a supernova. Novas can be repeating. And so we see all of a sudden we have this nova explosion now in the visible light spectrum and also across other wavelengths of light as well, but also visible to our naked eye. Here we have our visual magnitude. And so we didn't get any visual magnitude numbers from before the nova explosion, but basically it showed up on the scene at a 5.8. This is reverse logarithmic, so it goes from higher numbers to 0 and then eventually negative. For reference, Venus has an apparent magnitude of negative 4.2, and Sirius, the brightest star in our sky, is negative 1.46. The sun is like 20 something. So this is hovering right in this 5 range, actually going up to 4.8 on the 28th. And then we do have one measurement there back down to 5.6 it looks like. So that may be the drop, but maybe that's just an errant data point. Maybe it's continuing to be up here. So that's kind of an unknown, but look at the timing. This was on the 25th. And then these effects that I've been describing on the channel for the past few days were, well, the past few days. And so it's interesting, the linkage, in the fact that this nova explosion happened and then we noticed these interesting energies coming through the Schumann resonances. I felt like I had very much a cosmic experience over the past few days. Other people have reported that as well, like a big pulse of consciousness, it seems, hit our planet. And at the same time, we haven't had any nova explosions for a while. And so to quickly have 2 nova explosions back to back with V462 Lupi on June 12th, and then V572 Velorum on the 25th, back to back, I think is really interesting because me personally, I look at these sort of celestial events as omens and markers for what's occurring. Just like a comet just like an eclipse, all these things I think have significance beyond our understanding. So this is really exciting stuff and is really setting the stage for July, which based on the astrology is the craziest month of the year, and it may be one of the most pivotal years, 2025, of millennia. So we have a lot unfolding at this moment in time. Not only the conjunction between Saturn and Neptune, where they get within 13 arc minutes of each other mid-July, but then that also leads into a very notable kite formation early August, where we have Pluto and Uranus in a near perfect trine, both of them nearly perfectly sextile to Saturn and Neptune, with Mars in opposition to that group. So that is very interesting, very dynamic, and could give us quite a wild ride leading up to it, and even for a few weeks or months afterwards. So we've had 2 nova explosions. We are also waiting on CRB to have a nova explosion. So we could get just maybe a flurry of these. I don't know what that means. That's just a hypothetical speculation, but we've had 2 now, and we are waiting for a third that's due basically any time now. And here we have our 171 and 304 angstrom views of the sun composited together, so we can see these really absolutely insane plasma prominences are on the western limb right now. Check that one out. Basically a giant tornado of plasma. It's been there for a few days now. There are some others as well, and this one in particular has been getting bigger and bigger. It's basically taller. So look now at the height of that. That is about 175,000 kilometers tall, which equates to about 22 Earths stacked up end to end from pole to pole. So that is a huge, huge, huge prominence of plasma from the sun. It makes you wonder why we're having that. It's not like we've never seen this before, but there's a lot of them on the western limb. I can actually move this video around so you can see what I'm talking about. Notice the ones down here as well. So we have not only that big one up there, but we have these down here. Look at that one right there. There's quite a lot of these prominences off to the western limb. Guess what? That is the direction of Venus, Ceres, Saturn, and Neptune in a perfect line right now, with Mercury and Mars on the other side. So perhaps these planets electromagnetically are pulling on the sun and causing this plasma to kind of stretch out more than normal. They do have that aligned gravitational vector. This is all just speculation, but it's interesting. Perhaps this is an effect from this nova explosion that just recently occurred, V572 Velorum. Again, just an idea. It could just be the sun doing normal sun things. But if we do consider the sun as part of a larger system, we should expect it to react to these other events that are unfolding, like planetary resonances or interstellar explosions. In general, I have a philosophy that about 70% of the time you should be focused on what's right in front of you, and just in general the task of the next few days or the research immediately in front of you. So focus on what the sun is doing every day, focus on what the earth is doing every day, make that the body of your research and understanding. And then about 20% should be these longer term forecasts or research studies going back or forward, right? Planning things out for your future, but maybe like 6 months in advance. And then about 10% should be these moonshots or these really long time periods or trajectories. And so to add that 10% into this video, we're going to discuss solar cycle 25 and compare it to a different solar cycle that looks almost identical, going back more than 100 years. So this is solar cycle 25. We see that we ramped up like this. This is our ascending phase. It started December 2019, where sunspots are 0, and then the magnetic field starts to flip. So then you get these pushes of magnetic flux out from the sun. They start at high latitudes and eventually they terminate at the equator. And then you get this new polarity to emerge at the poles. And then you have a stable magnetic field while the sunspots are low. That polar field strength, by the way, has been going down now for about 50 years, which is interesting. But we see the sunspots rocketed up. We had a high of 215 there in August of 2014. Check that out, or 216 rather, according to NOAA. That has been our peak thus far for solar cycle 25, though we've had more relevant peaks of solar activity as it relates to us here on Earth in regards to geomagnetic storming. For example, May 2024, and then October 2024, and June, the very beginning of June this year, 2025. with the G5, G4, and G4 storms. But look at how we hit this high of 216, and then we had, I believe this is 7 months right there, where we basically had a holding pattern around 150 sunspots before dropping to below 80 in May. So a really precipitous drop in sunspot numbers in May, and that's a very odd signature for the solar cycle. If we zoom through some of these other solar cycles there, you will notice some drops, but typically unfolds over the course of a few months. And this is solar cycle 24, and then we have solar cycle 23 right here. You can see that in general, these peaks are a little bit more solid and not as volatile like ours was. Here's solar cycle 22. Look at that. Went up. Yeah, there's some volatility, but basically maintained 200 for more than 2 years. Let's go all the way to solar cycle 13. This one is very interesting. So here we have solar cycle 13, almost identical to solar cycle 25. Started around 1890, a little bit before that, rocketed up. Check this value there. This is, guess what? 215.4 in August. So same month and same sunspot count. And then we had this holding pattern there. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And it's around 150, a little bit lower. So more like 140. Here's our sunspot number for the y-axis. So about 140 right there. And actually we can get that exactly, that smooth monthly value is 142.3. And then look at how it dropped after that 6-month holding pattern, just like ours. It dropped to 87.1. So not as deep of a sunspot number drop as solar cycle 25, which went down below 80, but still had this peak in August of 215, holding pattern for 6 months, right around the same zone that we had, and then a precipitous drop. Look at how it rebounded though. It went up and then actually had its final hurrah here. So the next month it went up to 136. June is looking like we're going to have about 110 or 115 for our monthly sunspot count. So our rebound is not going to be as strong as it was for solar cycle 13. But then solar cycle 13 did get all the way back to a monthly count of 176.7. And this solar cycle is also a little unusual in that it had this very long descending phase. This is about 12 years right here, but just look how long this descending phase was. So very, very long, very similar structure to solar cycle 25, all the way up into this point there. And if this continues to hold true, then we could see, look at this. This is basically 2, 4, 6 years of descending activity. And you often get powerful geomagnetic storms to occur during the descending phase. You can have very strong solar flares to pop off during the descending phase. And so solar cycle 25 maximum may have a second rebound later this year. I'm thinking that may happen starting around like September or so, going through December. I don't know. I just have a few hunches with that. Regardless, we may get a second rebound, but then we will be sliding down. It looks very likely that we're not going to break our sunspot high for solar cycle 25 of 216 in August of 2024. We go back there. I don't think we're going to break that, but we could get a last little hurrah and then a very long slide down. And so that could keep solar activity in general, geomagnetic activity active on Earth for longer than some people may forecast. That's it for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. Again, I've been your host, Stefan Burns. This is what we cover on the channel. We examine what's happening energetically here on Earth by examining geologic events, geophysical energies like the Schumann resonances, solar activity, space weather, planetary resonances, even cosmic forces like these nova explosions, which we've had a sequence of now, which is quite interesting. Now, if you'd like to work with these energies a little bit more directly, I have 2 products I can recommend you. I make and mix these myself. The first is Spirituality. This is an awesome all-organic herbal tea blend composed of only 4 simple ingredients, but they work together synergistically. That is purple lotus flower, chamomile, passion flower, and mugwort. And this is great for activating your parasympathetic nervous system, helping you to rest, relax, and just in general feel a little bit more embodied. It helps you sleep, have some incredible dreams. That is a very commonly reported effect from spirituality. Effectively, I made this and formulated this in 2022 as a dream tea, and people kept asking me for it, so that's now online. The new website is earthevolution.com/store to check that out. Also, I recommend herb coffee, which is 50% single origin, organic Peruvian shade-grown beans, medium roasted. I know it's a lot. And then we also have the roasted chicory root, roasted dandelion root, all organic, and lion's mane mushroom, 12.5% of this bad boy. So you're actually getting a lot of lion's mane mushroom, which is fantastic for neuroplasticity, for regrooving your brain, for learning things faster. And in general, this is excellent to wake up with, pour a cup, and you kind of get right into a flow state, creative, but also productive. And so it's also just in general really good for your microbiome, your gut health, and more because of the chicory and the dandelion root. Don't sleep on those. So this is also on the website at earthevolution.com/store, plus many other products. There will be some new products launching on the site very, very soon. So make sure to check that out, and I will be back with more videos. So please subscribe to the channel, smash that like button, help the channel grow. Thank you all so much for your support. Wishing all of you well. Please take care of yourselves. Do some earthing and grounding, spend some time in nature today on this wonderful Sunday. I'll see you all very soon.